There's a lot of challenges getting tech ecosystems off the ground, but the great thing about a lot of software technology these days is it's fairly inexpensive. There's a lot of talented people. Even here in Ghana, there's some great entrepreneurs that we've already met, and I feel like there's nothing really holding anyone back except just the willingness to invest in lots of smart people here locally. And so getting more government and corporate involvement to help provide dollars and capital is really helpful. Another thing we can do is, make sure that government is also involved as both a buyer and a customer for services, as well as an investor. If there's any way to include, tax policy or incentives for both corporations and government to become customers for entrepreneurs, that also helps. And then finding ways to get larger fund structures that are in private equity and real estate to maybe contribute a percentage of their budgets to go towards technology investments when those are maybe just a small piece of their overall puzzle. A lot of people don't know the history of Silicon Valley, where a lot of the initial technology ecosystems were created by partnerships between corporations and government. And there was a lot of initial investment by government and the Small Business Administration in the 60s and 70s and 80s that helped get initial venture capital funds off the ground. And those in turn provide a lot of investment in the companies that became very successful in the 80s and 90s and then 2000 and later. So really, I think that's very possible here in Ghana also. And it's not very expensive compared to other areas like telecommunications or real estate or other oil and gas industries.
This whole workshop, the focus is on innovation and entrepreneurship. And government is determined to use innovation to solve our local problems. For instance, we know the challenges we have with garbage, the challenges we have with electricity, with sanitation, and many other things. And there's encouragement for the youth to use innovation and come up with applications that can be built on and eventually used by us as Ghanaians and even outside to solve similar problems as is being done in other countries. The approach of government has been on two levels, on the reforms of policies and operational levels. So you see ICT is now really very inculcated into a curriculum to ensure that yes, every child has a practical feel of what technology is like, and then those who would develop their affection and of course the desire to use it as career and then can come out with innovations. Government is also consciously ensuring that the gender disparity in the ICT industry is bridged by encouraging more females to go into the sector. And more importantly, government is offering reduced cost of real estate and providing a plug-and-play system at the Accra Digital Center, if you've heard about that. It's a center under the Ministry of Communications, and under the e-Transform project, there is a special support that's going to be for innovation, for younger startups, so that they can grow. So there's a lot being done by government, and then also to provide what we call matching grants to support their growth. There is a specific, quite a huge amount of money put aside to support innovation. And what is going to be is, these ideas, they will be pitched, and then the best and most viable ones will be selected into an incubation system. And as you have heard, there's a lot that go into mentorship and incubation of ICT ideas. So they will be mentored, and at every stage, whatever that is needed to develop. As one person said, there's sometimes something needed to even build the prototype that would attract investors. All of this government is willing to come up in a matching grant to support viable ones to help them grow, because government believes in the private sector, and that if the private sector grows, government inevitably grows.
I'm a Ghanaian and I was working on building a technology company across all of Africa and returned home. I realized that I really wanted to start another technology company here. And what I had to do was I had to bootstrap it, as we call it. So I had to put money in myself. And then I started going to find sort of key clients, kind of tell them what we could do, win over their trust. And so we're very customer funded. And so it's the work that we do that really funds our growth. And I think that we need to figure out more of that. We certainly talk to investors outside as well, and where we can partner, they also help as well. We're yet to kind of get to crystallizing how those partnerships work. But certainly one key part of that for me is that technology companies need to start talking more with one another to figure out how we tell the story of our technology industry. From my perspective, I think at this point, I think that there's a lot that's changed in the last 10 years in particular from a COBOL perspective. What I'd like to see is I'd like to see private sector get more of a strategy on board so that we can drive and speak up more about the agenda we would like to see from government. So for me, I think the next year is really about technology companies themselves getting together.
The government is the biggest customer for the IT firm. And so if there could be some dedicated, it takes major risk and decision to decide that you will use your local firms. And so given that we're in a new era, we just hope that some bold decisions will be taken in terms of using local expertise. I think Ghana is already has already structured a lot of partnerships with private sector already. The government, you look at the tax system, for instance, there's already a private-public partnership in the automation of the Ghana Revenue Authority, which is doing very well. You look at customs, so we already have some precedents. The customs is already, there's already a PPP existing. So I think Ghana is far ahead of the game in terms of building on the expertise of the private sector. But we also have a government in place that is really focused on targeting partnerships with the private sector. And so we do hope that this will be a new era, a new way of doing business, because the private sector cannot do it alone, the public sector cannot do it alone. When we learned that this group of very rich, rich in the sense, very physical as well as, intellectually rich geeks coming into Ghana, we thought that it was important not only to talk to the private sector, but also to engage with policymakers. Because a lot of the solutions to the challenges of this innovation ecosystem really also relies on making some policy changes and getting government input on some of the very critical infrastructure and resources that are needed to make the system work. I think from what we heard, of course, just to look at the innovation ecosystem, I think it's really what we've heard is just the lack of venture capital funds. But I think if you also look deeply, it's what will attract these funds. And so when companies are coming into Ghana and when they're interested in either investing in an existing company, they look at a whole lot of areas, the infrastructure, the enabling environment, the skills that are there, the sophistication of the companies themselves. If you look at Ghana, I think we've done pretty well in terms of a number of these key challenges. But obviously we're having this discussion because there's a lot more that we can do to set ourselves apart and to bring in the bigger venture capital firms that are needed to grow the innovation companies.
We have to be bold and we have to take steps. Some things that are not within our control, if you will, but if something is not within your control, then find another way around the problem. And so we need to be innovative. We need to take risks. I'm not sure if there's anything else other than that we can do. And one thing I will say is collaboration is key. So collaboration was brought up as a major pain point for a lot of local companies, and Cobalt being one of those local companies, I can definitely highlight that as an issue that we have faced. So we definitely need to find ways of collaborating and complementing each other's skill sets. Well, first and foremost, the visit of the Geeks on a Plane program. We felt that it was an important part of the ecosystem to highlight sort of relationships between sort of private sector and public sector, and to talk about ways in which we could sort of, so first of all, create a forum where we could get input from other people into the types of challenges that we're having, but then also sort of come up with solutions and for other people to see what kind of challenges we're having to offer solutions.
I think the government is losing a tremendous amount of money as these ideas die out, because in the end, such talents tend to look for other avenues that may or may not be their particular interest, neglecting the idea which could have been a multi-million idea. So if the government turns attention to supporting such ideas, we never know how far they can get tomorrow and how much revenue they can bring. Instead of neglecting these young ones to look to other means of employment when there's actually a lot of avenues choked. You know. So government really doesn't lose ideas when these young talents die out, and because they are not getting the support, the mentoring, and ultimately the funding to develop such ideas. The gap of how such young talents can relate to policymakers, or how we can get the government to be able to source such innovation from the early stage and then mentor, nurture, and then fund such ideas to the better of the young people, basically. We're calling on government and various stakeholders to come to, or not to overlook, the stages such as senior high school when they're talking about tech, because we have a lot of innovation coming from there, seeking to solve problems even in education and around them. So they should include even innovations from that level as low as the senior high school, and help mentor these ones, and then build a better country.